Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Fine Arts Reading Room podcast. I'm Quinlan Green, a student librarian at the Reading Room, and today you'll be hearing from Tyra Maria Trono, a photographer who studies at Concordia and has contributed to Art Matters, Kuja, and the VAV Gallery in the past. Tyra was a FARR resident artist this past school year, working on a series of photographs centered on Plaza Cote-Des Neiges. We're so pleased to use this time to share some insight behind her work. In this interview, Tyra and I talk about her family's history in the area, feelings about the future as renovations change the landscape, and what it means to try to carefully capture a space which means so much for so many patrons.
My mom actually immigrated in Canada back in the late 80s. And when she had came to Montreal, usually most Filipinos do settle in the Plamondon-area, which is in Cote-Des Neiges more specifically. And yeah, so usually there's a big Filipino community in this area. And when my dad had arrived in the 90s, early 90s to join my mom, they settled actually right like 2 blocks away from this mall specifically. And I grew up in Cote-Des Neiges before we decided to move to the West Island, which also most Filipinos do, because in the West Island it's English. Then, like, yeah, if you want to get like a house, like you would want to go like in the West Island. Yeah, it's English, and yeah. So even though we moved from the neighborhood, we still go back every week just to do our groceries or to buy like certain things that we need. And we do have some family there. And yeah, so that's like just a small history of the area of Cote-Des Neiges.
For your family, that sounds really nice. Do your parents have any sort of like specific memory of like when they arrived, and has it changed much since when they arrived to now?
That's actually a funny question that you asked, because I'm actually working with archives right now for another project, and I came across this one photograph of my parents and a couple of their friends, and it was a photograph in the Plaza Cote-Des Neiges.
Right.
And I came across the photograph, and right in the back it says welcome, like new arrival Francisco, which is my dad. And this is actually one of the first weeks when he got to Montreal, and then they went to the plaza. And in the photograph, like, you see that he has like a bag of like groceries and even like sort of like home equipment. Like he had like the thing that you have when you iron clothes. I don't know, a board in his hand. Yeah, so just like him settling in Montreal, and you could just see that in that photograph. I should include it. Yeah.
Nice. That sounds awesome. Does it look much different from the space? I mean, like the place around them, is it
Yes.
sort of the same, or is it
No, it's actually really different.
Right.
Like,
okay.
in the photographs too, like you see like the background of the mall, and you see ice cream shop that used to be there. And when I grew up, like, I've never encountered that ice cream shop.
Right. Okay. So, like, as someone who sort of doesn't know too much about the plaza, but like seeing it through your work, I'm assuming like it's a pretty important place to all sorts of people who immigrate into the Cote-Des Neiges area. Like, it's sort of a huge fixture for people living there. Yeah.
It's actually something that I've been working on since my first year of university. When I was in my first year of university, I was exploring another mall, actually, the Carey Square Mall. And that was actually a mall that I would also go to before, I would go to the plaza and the Carey Square Mall. And with the Carey Square Mall, I was working more with the Dollar Cinema. And I don't know if you know the Dollar Cinema, but its own. Oh, really? You heard of it? Its own. So long story short, it's a cinema that has really cheap tickets. They're $2.50, and it's owned and run by one man called Bernie. And I actually started going to this place since it opened, and I was also 7 years old when it opened. And it was a great way for my dad to, take us out, and to do activities. And obviously, being a parent, it's expensive taking your kids out. And I had
Mm.
a I have a twin sister, so we'd always go to the cinema because it was super cheap. It used to be $1 back then, and you could get also food for $1. So we would always go there every time there was a movie that we would want to watch. My parents would always take me there. And yeah, so with that project, I started off with that project that just made me reflect on my childhood and also the memories that I had shared with the owner. And what drove me to do the plaza was when I was in school, like also in my first year, I started realizing I took photographs for fun once at the plaza because I wanted to compare both the Cary Square Mall and the plaza. And when I had just gone to take these photographs in my first year, afterwards, when I went back, I started realizing the renovations that was happening in the plaza. And
Mm.
I ended up having a conversation with one of my good friends who's studying architecture, and he was the one that told me about the plan of the plaza and what was happening to the plaza. And yeah, so
Mm.
that what drove me to make this project too, and just made me reflect on what it used to be. Like I wanted to capture what I remembered it as,
Right.
before it transforming to what it is now. And yeah, so
And
I
and
think a
what
lot.
is
Yeah.
the sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I was just curious, like, what is the actual plan that your friend was telling you about? Like, for someone who doesn't really know, like, the changes going on, if you could, like,
Mhm.
remember some specifics or what you remember to describe those changes. Um,
Yeah, because it's funny because we just started this conversation about how some places in Montreal, like example, there's Little Italy, and there's Italians there. And then I made this joke. I was like, why can't we like have it like, like certain name for our like neighborhood because there's a lot of
mhm.
Filipinos there. And he made that comment. He like started like, briefing me on this. He's like, Tyra, like it's never going to be called like Little Manila, because if
Hmm.
we do decide to change this name, we're never going to bring like sort of like, like condos or like, other people that would want to move into this neighborhood because it's going to be identified as, just Filipinos living there. And he, yeah, he briefed me on this, and he also told me how many condos are coming around like in the neighborhood to sort of like, bring this like lively, more like hip, like
Mhm.
neighborhood around. And also with the plaza, that plays a toll in like they have like a lot of family owned businesses, and people go there and they're like, oh, this is like hip and this is cool. So yeah, so I guess it's just like
People are sort of like seeing
mhm.
um, like the family owned businesses are sort of getting pushed out. Do you mean like in a sort of like the gentrification way, or they're sort of being tokenized,
No,
perhaps? Is that?
I feel like it's, yeah, like I can't really say tokenized, but it's just like
Mm.
it became more popular, which is great. Like, like
Mm.
they're getting more business. But I know a lot of people tend to go there because it's cheap too, the food, and it's very like, like it's just different than what you would have than if you were downtown, like, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I get that. So it's sort of like the community is changing a bit.
Hmm.
So I guess like when we're talking about your photos, to sort of pivot towards that, like the sort of like this the sense that you're going for, like there's a bit of like emptiness to it, also like nostalgia maybe,
Hmm.
but certainly I mean the emptiness being in part because of when you're taking these photos as well. We're in the middle of the COVID pandemic and nobody's really using or going out as much as normal. So maybe I'm segueing a bit, but like I'm curious, like what you found when you were taking these photos, like how it sort of speaks to your understanding of the place now, and when you have this sort of like visual aesthetic that's kind of, again, it's like sort of there's like a lot, there's not too many people, and there's sort of like this there is like an atmosphere to it that I don't really want to name, because maybe you can talk about what atmosphere you were looking for when you were taking these photos, and how that sort of like connects to your impression of the space when you go back nowadays as a young adult, I guess. I don't know
Yeah,
if that's
that's
sort of
actually,
me rambling, but yeah.
yeah, that's actually a great question. Yeah, like when you ask me like why is there no one, like it's actually on purpose because there's usually a lot of people at the mall during like certain hours. But what I tried to do was try to photograph more in the morning, because I would usually the mall opens at 10. I would usually get there like at 9 start taking photographs, because I tried going during the day. Like I've taken photos during the day, but it's just that it's kind of tricky taking pictures there and people looking at me with a camera, and it just, it kind of feels awkward too, because I don't want to put them in a place that they should be in my photographs too as well.
Right.
And also, if you take photos in a mall, it's sort of like a private space, and you're technically not allowed to take these pictures. And I've already gotten stopped by the security several times
Right.
when taking these pictures. So it's just a way of like, if you're in the morning, there's not that many people, and there's not that many security walking around. The so that's what I've been doing when taking these photographs.
Right.
But yeah, and also during this time of COVID, there's not that many people too at the mall, probably because of safety reason, and people would rather be at home and maybe just order online. So every time I've been going since the pandemic, there hasn't been as much people as they used to be.
So a little bit of a effect from the pandemic, but it's also interesting that you bring up the sort of the effect that that it has on your work when you're going at an earlier time and you're trying not to take pictures of people, and also like everything you just said. Because I know we've talked about, I think I mentioned this like word before. I was like sort of looking at your work, and I was like, oh, it's sort of like liminal spaces, like sort of like there's those websites that you find online of like nostalgic spaces from your childhood or something. And I feel like the impression that your work gives to me is sort of something like that, but it is interesting to note and for people to know that it's not so much deliberate choices. It is also like an effect of how to go about making art and taking photography in places that you don't necessarily want to interrupt the flow of people or take pictures of private property. So that's an interesting kind of, there's the impression of it, but there's also your intention, which is sort of a bit of something else. So it's interesting that you talk about like the condofication of the city, sort of.
Yeah.
It's one of the major sites, right? It's the Plamondon-area. So like that's sort of being the mark of change that's happening to the neighborhood, and sort of wanting to see. Would you say that these photos that you've taken reflect how you remember it more than what it's becoming, or is it sort of a testament to the changes that have happened already? Are these sort of your memories that we're looking at, or is it sort of a image of what changes have already happened in this space?
I feel like it's like a mix of both, since I've captured photographs before the change and after the change. But I feel like the photographs that resonate with me the most is the photographs that I've taken before the renovation, because it reminds me of all the memories that I had at the place before everything is like sort of changing right now. And it also makes me think back when I was a kid, going there and going to certain places in the mall, and some of it isn't even there now. Yeah.
Right. And I guess sort of like to tie in back to the start of when we're thinking about your family's history there, which I feel like sort of speaks to a lot of people's family history in the region, or in the neighborhood. I guess it's sort of it's a sort of shows the importance of these spaces to community building and people's sort of reliance on malls and places like that, just to sort of have their family life and have aspects of their social life. So do you feel like the sort of the memories that you have when you were a kid of sort of always having this place as a consistent area to sort of live around and to hang out around, is that going to be available for people in the future, do you think, or is it changing in ways that is making that dynamic sort of different or even impossible? The future of that kind of interaction, do you think that'll be able to stay the same? Or
I personally think it could, but I mean, like, it just depends if it's affordable, right, to live, like, in the neighborhood. Because I have still a lot of friends and family that do still live there, but I know the rent is getting higher.
Right.
And, if people can't live there anymore, I guess it'll change. But at the same time, I know that the community there is very strong, and there's a lot of business that is thriving in the neighborhood. So I don't think that personally it will change, but I think the only reason for it to change is if the rent goes up, or if they evict people from this neighborhood. But right now I think it's going well.